This is arezki, principal analyst at risk assessment firm arezki LLC, and I am also the editor of the North Africa Journal. Welcome to Risk Podcasts, where we discuss the root causes of instability in Africa and in the Middle East. Greetings. My name is Arezki. I am the editor of the North Africa Journal. I'm also the principal analyst of risk assessment company arezki LLC. Now, some dozen years ago, I released a podcast called How to Plunder a Nation, in which I profiled three individuals who surrounded the late disgraced Tunisian dictator Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali. That was before he fled his country amid the so-called Jasmine Revolution. Now, the three people that were subject of the podcast were Ben Ali's son-in-law, Sakhr al-Matri, the president's wife, Layla Ben Ali, and nephew, Imad Trabalsi. The podcast, from my perspective, was actually successful, having reached more than 120,000 people on social media, including some 20,000 people on YouTube. Now, as we released the podcast, we found that people, and in particular our listeners, are extremely interested in the workings of regime operatives and crooked businessmen and politicians and stories that focus on corruption. So today, let me bring to you one of those interesting stories, this time on corruption in Libya. So if you were to guess how much money relatives and officials who surrounded the late dictator Muammar Gaddafi stashed outside of the country, what would you say is the right number? $100 million? $500 million? $1 billion, you say? Well, none of the above. It's a staggering figure that has so far escaped the real owners of the money, the Libyan people. Now, these days, though, it seems that the Libyan authorities have reached out to their counterparts in the United States to seek help to recoup the $120 billion stolen by the Gaddafi clan. Now, not all the money is stashed in the United States. A lot of it is there, for sure, but not all of it is there. Plenty of it is everywhere, except in the Libyan treasury, where it really belongs. So where did that figure of the $120 billion come from? Well, it came from a 2016 report drawn by an NGO called Transparency International. And these global NGOs, like Transparency International, tend to have a great deal of credibility. They would not publish a report without strong basis to back their assessment, which tells me that there is a strong likelihood that the real stolen money may be much bigger than what Transparency International was able to track. Remember, these organizations are likely to report what they can count. Plenty of more money probably may be difficult to account for. So far, the Libyans have managed to trace more than $50 billion in assets thanks to the help of a UN agency specialized in that kind of tracing. Now, those assets were not super hard to find because most of them were tangible or physical assets. That would include real estate, precious metals, airplanes, and bank deposits, obviously. They were located in countries where asset tracking and owner's identification rules are standard practices, such as in the United States and Western Europe, perhaps minus the notorious Switzerland and other places that dictators and criminals around the world hide their stolen money. You open up a bank account in the US, you better have all the information that helps identify who you are. But then the UN could not trace everything, and so the Libyans had to knock at the door of the Americans, who really have sophisticated intelligence that could eventually point them to the right directions. There has been, in the meantime, some minimal progress in Libya's efforts to recover its stolen assets. We know of a property stolen by Saif al-Islam, the notorious son of Gaddafi, in London, valued at about $12 million. That was recovered in 2012. The Central Bank of Malta was supposed to return to Libya some $100 million on the basis of a court order. I don't have any update on that, but I assume Malta complied with the court order. The money was stashed by by Gaddafi's second son. I think his name is Muttasim Billah. But we're still talking about $120 billion on the low end of a range that is still missing. So it's a lot of money that's missing there. So yes, the United States certainly can help. But will it help retrieve the hidden assets in the current political climate in Libya? For the Americans, the question is, who really leads Libya these days? Who are the real authorities? The North African nation, as you know, has two rival governments claiming to represent Libya. In the northwest of the country, specifically in the traditional capital of Tripoli, is the regime of Abdelhamid Baibah, a regime that the UN says is the legitimate one. On the other side, that is in the northeast, is Baibah political rivals protected by a warlord, their perpetual, or what I would call the perpetually dangerous Khalifa Haftar, who has been traditionally sponsored by the UAE, Egypt, Russia, France, and a number of foreign governments, who clearly have no interest in the well-being of the Libyan people. And then there is Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of the slain dictator and the recipient of a quote-unquote PhD from the London School of Economics, no less. I guess Saif has learned absolutely nothing from that school. But I hope that school learned something about that, though. Saif, as if he were in a kingdom, claims that he is the legitimate future leader of Libya. And he has even launched a presidential campaign back in 2021 to try to regain control of the country. No less. You have to give the Libyans, though, some credit for attempting to organize their asset recovery efforts into a formal agency named the Libyan Asset Recovery and Management Office based in Tripoli. It's also known as LARMO. Now, beside the Libyans hoping the Americans will provide intelligence on where stolen assets are located, Washington will need to help Libya understand why 8 C-1300 cargo planes paid for by the Gaddafi regime were never delivered to Libya. This may not necessarily be a case of corruption in its classic definition, but a case that the US authorities will need to shed some lights, obviously. Setting aside Muammar Gaddafi's corrupt family and friends, what is the state of corruption in Libya today? You would say, well, no more Gaddafi, so the situation may be better. Well, no. Corruption in Libya in 2023 is endemic and is in general. The culture of corruption is so ubiquitous and widespread that Transparency International ranks Libya third before last in the MENA region, doing only better than Syria and Yemen. But what may be a sign of hope, the Libyans themselves speak openly about the extent of corruption in their country. A report from the Court of Auditors, that's a Libyan government agency, looking at 2020-2021 financial year, recognized that massive amount of money were stolen from the state treasury by all Libyan institutions without exception. This is a quote. Whether these institutions are in the west or in the east, billions of dinars have essentially vanished and have been unaccounted for. Spending by governments, with an S at the end, governments, since there are two of them, often occurs without any clear reason. And fictitious or ghost employees allegedly working for the administrations are widespread, and they've been receiving salaries. Corruption is endemic not just within the Western government, but also within the Eastern rival and even the mighty oil giants, the National Oil Company and the central bank, are not immune. Some of the recipients of that money are clearly the militia groups that are often used for protection. So when you have dictators, generals, army generals, and rival authorities, as it has been the case for Libya, nothing works and everything breaks. Until Libya gets its act together, I would be hesitant to help Libya recover the stolen assets now without a unified, united democratic government that is accountable in the eyes of the Libyan people. This is because we know what would happen to that money should the current governments manage to put their corrupt hands on it. It will vanish without any doubt. Thank you for listening, and I hope to get back to you soon with another episode. Goodbye.